Hey, Sylvie Albert, Professor of Strategy and Leadership at the University of Winnipeg, and we're here today to talk about leadership of innovation. I'm joined by my colleagues, Al McLeod, which has done several videos with me already, and John Ferris, who is President and CEO of Envision Edge, a consulting company that helps organizations through strategy and innovation. And welcome both. Thank you very much. So let's talk about some of the types of skills of leaders that we need in organizations. And in this, well, first of all, this whole presentation is organized under three main themes. So as leaders, we have to start with a vision, but we also have to ensure that there is a plan for short and long-term outcomes, and that whole process of evaluating where we're going. We also need to have leaders that understand business models. And so it's not about just coming up with great ideas, but it's about understanding what it's going to take to develop them and make them into successful new products, services, and so forth. So skills across the organizations that are needed. And the third part is in the variety of skills that we need, because we don't want that groupthink, and we want to have people that have different types of skills on our team, whether, well, all of them actually, but we don't want to have teams of just scientists. We need to have people that perhaps have that human relations and conceptual and other kinds of skills. So we'll talk about each of these areas today. And the first one are models that we talked about in previous video, about different ways to conceptualize innovation. So Al, maybe you want to explain a little bit that Strategizer series.
Yeah. So one of the series I do like, or one of the models I like, is the Strategizer's model, which is based on business model canvas. And so when you have a leader of innovation, they really need to be able to understand everything at the business model level. They need to understand the industry, they need to understand their competitors and your business models, so that you can actually understand where you're going and what's the right things to do. So in the middle here is Strategizer's explore and exploit, they call it, method. And so there in the explore, what you're doing is, in that box, you're looking at finding new business models. So you're looking for high growth, and you're looking for low risk, and you're trying to always look for new things that can fit in that box, and then the objective is to try to de-risk them and find the ones that are the best opportunities. In exploit, what you're doing is you're looking for all your current businesses, and you're determining which ones are at some threat. And if they're under some threat, then what you want to do is especially if they're your most successful businesses, you want to find ways to sustain them.
And each one of those areas kind of require different skills, doesn't it?
Right.
So what's your experience, John, in terms of, you can't, not everybody is good at everything. And some people are great at future casting. Some people are really great at, figuring out, dotting the I's so that, you're really developing the most efficient. So what do you suggest in terms of gathering those leadership skills in organizations?
Right. Well, I think the key is at the most senior level, you need to be focusing on the Horizon 3. What are those biggest opportunities for growth? Are the biggest opportunities to grow the organization, create revenue, et cetera? So at the end of the day, that's really the core leader's job at the most senior level in the organization. Mm-hmm. Focus on the vision, focus on the strategy, and get the right people in place. So that would be Horizon 3 using the Horizon model. Horizon 2 innovation, which we would call core innovation. These are necessary improvements that can be made, and things that could be substantively improved. And that's where you can bring in your middle managers or supervisors even to help in some of those areas. Their job isn't necessarily to look at the biggest strategy, but these are still core areas of the organization to focus on related to innovation. When you look at Horizon 1, let's do it. We need to improve this area, or we need to accelerate this opportunity, so you can get your teams involved, your frontline leaders, et cetera, involved in that Horizon 1 innovation. So you need the capability and capacity at all three levels, focusing on the very strategic future areas, focus on the midterm, and then focused on the most immediate areas, which are more frontline leaders.
Right. So we talk about also the idea of taking stock of who you have currently. Right. And so, looking at your team, are you missing anything? So Al likes to talk about the intrapreneurs. Where are they? So what are the kinds of skills that you're looking for in your team that align well with innovation?
Yeah, so these characteristics, being creative, but is an obvious one that probably doesn't need to be said, but we said it. But having empathy, being able to walk in someone else's shoes and truly to understand them, and don't assume that you understand your customers or your coworkers, for example.
Particularly in design thinking, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even like all of the methods have a way of looking at things from the customer perspective. They're just different models, different methods, different tools that people have. So empathy is very important. Being open-minded, not coming in, being able to actually open yourself up to different ideas and not having biases is really hard. It's probably the hardest thing on the page, to be honest with you, because you think you have it and you don't have it. Practical, because things do have to go into, nothing will be perfect, especially in the beginning. Having knowledge, obviously you want people who have a lot of knowledge. Being a good communicator, a very strong communicator is important because everyone won't like your ideas, and you have to convince people. Being a collaborator, because one of the things about working within a company, one of your superpowers is the company, right? If your competitor is a startup, they don't have that, right? You have this powerful company. So how can you collaborate within a company? And being resilient, because so much goes wrong, whether you're a startup or a company and you're doing innovation, knowing that there will be problems and being able to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and going back to it.
Right. And so we talk about before, really understanding that business model, and it's unfortunate that in a lot of organizations, maybe senior management understands the business model, but not necessarily everyone, and that makes it more difficult. So you have to skill people in understanding your value proposition, your market, how the entire system operates. If you want them to help you with ideas, they have to know what they're working with currently, right?
Right. And if you're going to add anything new, you have to understand how it affects your current business model canvas. And I would do one of these for each of your businesses if you have multiple businesses. This is one of the greatest inventions that was ever made in innovation, because it's such a simplifying, yet such a deep canvas. And the decision they made to kind of make it a Creative Commons license so that everyone can use it makes it ubiquitous. So I use it for everything. I think it's a great tool. And if you have a group of people and a leadership team that thinks at this level, it's very powerful for innovation.
Right. And another one that we talked about is the group definition canvas. And how does that fit in terms of leadership skills?
So the group definition canvas is something that I worked on with this company called LPK. They own it, they developed it, but I was one of the people that worked on it with them. And so the point behind the group definition canvas, it is based on the concept of the business model canvas, but what the point is to help a leader, a new innovation leader, or someone who's trying to make changes to the group, actually define the value proposition of their group. Just like we saw in the last business model canvas, there's a value proposition. In this case, you're trying to define what your organization needs are for innovation, and then what you're going to do, and in the middle is the value you're going to provide to the corporation. So this becomes your framework that you use to execute on the innovation mission.
There's a strong link here to the blue and yellow card, right, John? And when you talked about training people to use these tools, this is part of developing your leaders.
Exactly, and to enable innovation, having a common framework, a common tool set, a toolkit is absolutely critical. And I think Business Model Canvas does an awesome job of that. And I often say it doesn't really matter what model you use, just pick one and experiment with it, see if it works with the organization. But having that framework, the common mindset, and the skills to run this is really the key to it.
Right. So there's this research here from Pisano. There's us academics, we love to come up with all kinds of explanations for things, and I think these are great words of wisdom that if you want to develop that culture of innovation, you have to be able to tolerate failure. And at the same time, you tolerate failure, but not incompetence, and you have to learn from your failure for it to be valuable. And you have to be therefore willing to experiment. So, when you're thinking of your own culture, your own leaders, do you have that already? Because if you don't have that toleration for failure and you do not have haven't been doing a lot of experimenting, that's your first starting point, because nothing will get done until people understand that, you know, there is a new way of doing things and you're going to be supported and all those kinds of things. And so some of those points are really important to look at. People that are individually accountable to what happens, and teams are also accountable to what happens. And people are able to make decisions. You know, all great things that you want to make sure that that people incorporate into their DNA to be able to do innovation, and other things that you want to make sure that are not there, like you know, a lot of protectionism, and you know, people who fail, but there's no learning, or who are not doing what they should be doing, but there's no repercussions. And then people get discouraged because they think that, you know, there's no accountability for what's happening. So you want to add anything to these behaviors we're looking for from leaders?
Yeah, maybe just to comment, yeah, innovation culture really starts and ends with leadership. It's all about leadership. They set the tone, right? Starting with the most senior leadership. So making sure they're, you know, they're articulating the why, the purpose, the reason to believe in the organization. That's the job. So they need to do that. With large organizations, you often find what we sometimes say the concrete in the middle, because the senior leaders haven't communicated to middle management, for example, what the vision is, what needs to be accomplished, et cetera. So they need to really get the entire leadership team on board so it can be distilled down to the employee population. So really focusing on leaders at all level to make sure they're connected to the why, the purpose, and there's excellent communicating, et cetera. I also find with leadership there's kind of three elements that they need to be accountable for. One is autonomy, allowing autonomy to their teams. That's kind of number one. Defining the purpose, what's the mission and the purpose behind why they're doing what they're doing. And allowing for learning, allowing for fail fast, fail cheap learning so that they're continually learning. So if you have autonomy, mastery, and purpose, then that's really how you start evolving culture, creating culture, and guiding culture.
Mm-hmm. So another book that we both love, Al, is, and I think reverts back to what you were saying, John, that growth mindset. And we're not always growth, we're not always fixed. Depending on what happens to us in life, sometimes we switch back and forth. But maybe explain what both of these concepts mean now.
Yeah, this is a great book by Carol Dweck, and this came out of her research with children in school. And it really speaks to me because this is one of the challenges that I've had in my career, certainly, is if you have a couple failures, you can retreat quickly to a fixed mindset. And by the way, when I mean failures, I mean bigger ones. But if you look at the growth versus fixed mindset, I think, as you said, it's not one or the other. There's a continuum there. And with some things, you may have a growth mindset, and some things you may have a fixed mindset. So you may be a great mechanic, a car mechanic, and not afraid of anything, but you may not be an artist and be terrified to do a simple drawing. So having a growth mindset, though, is really about trying to say, hey, but I can learn to do anything. I may not be the best artist, but I can try. I can do something. I can learn. Looking at failure being an opportunity to grow is an incredible part of having a growth mindset and understanding that that's how you improve. Challenges, understanding that people challenging you or taking on challenges helps you grow. Understanding that it's not about how smart you are. The old IQ testing, to me, is one of the worst things that ever happened to people. It's what's your effort like? Can you keep going? Do you have grit? And taking feedback. A lot of people think of feedback and they don't want to hear any feedback because they take it as negative. A lot of people actually, when they hear someone else has done well, they get jealous. And really, that's a great opportunity for learning. And you should be congratulating that person and then say, how'd you do that? So I can learn it. And liking to try new things. So that's what the growth mindset is about. Fixed mindset is you actually believe that you were born a certain way and that's what your skill set is. And you find it very difficult to change. And you like to stay with things you know. And that's okay, you can live that way. But it's really hard in a business perspective. If you're going to be a great employee or a great startup person, you really need to cultivate that growth mindset. And there's ways, if you look at this book, of actually working on that. And I've used some of those methods. It's a great book.
Yeah, and you know, it's also important to understand your team. Like we always come back to, do you know what your culture is? Do you understand, the motivation behind every one of your team members, and what can you do to develop everyone as a leader, really, because you need people to be more engaged and to take responsibility. Do you have any suggestions with that regards?
Well, I think it comes back to engaging people in the purpose and the vision, right?
Right.
So often if there's resistance, it's because people don't understand what their role is or where they fit into the whole equation. So it starts with education, letting people know. And then allowing autonomy. So based on articulating what the challenge and the opportunity is by the senior leadership team, then you allow the autonomy for the next level leaders to look at that. And we do find there's a bit of a bell curve for leadership and growth mindset. There's people that are on board and have that growth mindset, and they're just kind of the first ones to volunteer for something.
Right.
The vast majority in the middle are saying, well, I'm just not sure how I fit with this. Once they know how they fit with this opportunity, they're on board no matter what. The back end of the curve, you have some resistors, that they just need a little more convincing, or they need to see that things are moving. The growth mindset is moving more in the organization. Then at the back, at the very back end, you have active resistors, and those are people that often we've asked to free up for future possibilities. You can go work somewhere else and have that mindset where you're not wanting to change. But I think applying that model can work as well.
I think a lot of organizations are trying, they know that there's always the same 6 people that are volunteer for everything. How do you get that wider majority more engaged? And that's the challenge, right? How do you innovate, not innovate, but motivate? And do you want to say anything with?
Yeah, so the World Economic Forum did a study, and they said in 2025, the top list of skills will be, and they showed the list, and the list is literally a list of entrepreneurial skills. So my question is, if that's all the people you're going to hire, what are you going to do with them once they get into your organization?
Right.
So you have to learn to manage a new way. If you want people in who are going to make change and be entrepreneurial, you better not manage them the same way with the same HR policies and all that kind of stuff. 2 companies, my favorites, Google and Microsoft, have both adopted a growth mindset at the manager level. So they hire for it, and then their expectations is that the managers will look to their people and also develop that. And they have a lot of company programs, and they've changed a lot of their processes to fit that mold versus the old style succession plans and things like that, because they don't work with it. If you bring in entrepreneurs and you have old style succession planning where it's basically who you know and how long you've been around, that's not going to work.
Yes. Yeah, you can discourage people quite quickly if you bring them on board, but you don't have the projects that are exciting enough for them to work on.
Yep.
And so very quickly, I'll maybe explain that difference between the entrepreneur and the intrapreneur.
Right. So both are there to make change. They're just doing it differently. So if you look at the entrepreneur, they're risking their own capital, right? They're raising their own capital, and it's all on their shoulders. They're independent. They're creating a company, and their motivation is change the game in an industry. That's a real entrepreneur in a startup. Whereas an entrepreneur, the company is taking the risk. You could say there's a lot of reputational risk, and there certainly is, but the company is taking the real risk because it's their money. They're reliant on the internal org. They need to have political acumen and leverage corporate resources, which is a superpower they have. And their objective is value creation, but their motivation has to be intrinsic. They have to actually be intrinsically motivated, because there's a lot of resistance to change in most organizations, so you really have to be intrinsically motivated.
And the reality is that you need both in organizations, because the entrepreneur might be a little bit more risk taker, but if you don't find ways to motivate them to stay, that's the first person that's going to jump ship and be your competitor with a solution that he feels will not sell internally, but they can take it out on their own and do it. And so you, as a leader, you want to make sure that you're finding ways to keep those people really on board at all times, right? So other skills, maybe we can go through that
Yeah, this
quickly.
model, I like this model. It's from the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. I'll go through quite quickly, but if you look at it, being able to recognize opportunities, and you'll recognize that, as an entrepreneur, why you need the same as entrepreneurs need. You have to be able to identify opportunities. You have to take initiative. No one else is going to do it. You have to be self-reliant. Again, no one else is going to do it. You have to convince people to do what you want, what you think is the right thing to do. You have to be creative and innovative. Critical thinking and problem solving is an important one, because innovation still has to be implemented. And the critical thinking and problem solving part comes later. It really does. It comes later. Being flexible and adaptable to all the things that'll go wrong along the way, and having that kind of future orientation, being able to see a vision of the future. Being comfortable with risk is the last one. And the comfort with risk to me is all about that a trade-off between risk and failure.
Right.
You know, keeping your failure small by understanding how you reduce your risk, but not being frozen by it. Right? Don't be frozen by risk. You have to be comfortable with it because you know how to manage it.
And I think these kinds of things, they just don't drop from the sky. And you know, you hope that this is what you're going to get, or you're going to hire people, and that's, you know, this is going to fix everything. These are systems that you can influence to make happen. So either through policies and procedures, incentive systems, training, removing barriers for people. So I think that you can take each one of those and ask the question, am I doing all of the right things for each of those areas to have the highest efficiency? And if not, then these are change and innovations that you can include to develop that, right?
I think every organization needs to build an entrepreneur force. I really think they need to have an entrepreneur force, have mentors who are more experienced, entrepreneurs who are more experienced, mentor newer entrepreneurs, and just continually trying to do that.
And I think to add, I think employees at the end of the day want to do something bigger than themselves, not just their day job is really important, but focusing on those biggest opportunities in the organizations to improve things, I think is really key. And we all know that today is a war on talent, right? And engagement is a huge issue.
Right.
You establish and grow and foster entrepreneurship in an organization. That's a total way to engage employees, helps with retention and engagement, and produces amazing results. So I think it's a necessity today. It's not a nice to have. It's actually something that organizations must do.
And you gave the perfect introduction to this slide that Al developed on all kinds of ideas that you can promote that intrapreneurs. So you want to give some of those to the rest of us?
Yeah, I'm not going to go through them all, but the point here is that there are a lot. The word entrepreneur has become 100% associated with innovation, and for sure, entrepreneurs innovate. But entrepreneurs are people who make change. And if you look at some of these roles, like corporate business development, having an entrepreneur in there who actually can, understand business models, understand change is important. Doing mergers and acquisitions is a very entrepreneurial because it's very complex and you learn a lot. So all of these are jobs. So leading a major IT business transformation program. Most of my career was in IT. Those are hard jobs. And out of the end of it, if you're a business sponsor or an IT leader in that, you always learn amazing amounts about failure and what works and what doesn't work. So these are some of the jobs that you can move people around into to train them in entrepreneurship.
Right. And during that time, you're training them on conceptual skills because they have to think in terms of strategy.
Yeah.
You're training them on human relation skills because they have to convince their teams on how to do things and understand culture. You're training, and they're obtaining a whole bunch of technical skills. So you're hitting all of the basis to develop those leaders that will help you with innovation.
And flexibility, incredible human flexibility.
Yes. So the organizational challenge. So, we talk about organizations are seeing a lot of disruptive threats, but a lot of these are opportunities. And, when we talk about organizations today have so much fewer employees and they're operating in network forms and so forth. We've seen inflection points for companies that existed and are no longer because they're seeing it as threats rather than looking at what the opportunity is behind it. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these other organizational challenges that you see?
Go ahead, John.
Well, a good illustration actually of opportunity or threats becoming opportunities is COVID. We've been through an international pandemic, and some organizations have thrived because they've been able to adjust to remote learning or to remote facilitation, et cetera. So I think seeing those threats as an opportunity, I think is really key, and that mindset is really it. I think that today the number one business challenge we hear is the war on talent. Having the right leadership in place, having the right talent in place, team members in place. So I think engaging employees in innovation, entrepreneurship is really that key to propel organizations into the future. And it's really about ongoing growth. And ongoing growth, the competitive advantage for an organization is not the products or services, it's a culture that they have. So if they create a culture of ongoing product development, ongoing innovation, ongoing entrepreneurship, that's the competitive advantage. So leaning into that today, I think, is really, really the key to growth.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of these, if you, one sec, the traditional policies that you have, HR and incentives and all those things, they're developed, first of all, they're often developed by the group that develops them from their mindset versus an employee mindset.
True.
Customer. And I see that all the time, and it just drives me crazy. It happens in business with customers as well, but certainly internally. And you have to actually start to think about some of those things and think about, if I'm trying to attract a different and cultivate a different kind of employee, what do I have to do with my systems to make it so that everybody's not walking around rolling their eyes all day?
Right.
Right? Because if that happens, you'll have lower engagement, lower customer satisfaction, and employees tend to wander off. And you won't see them actively looking for ways to make the company better.
Right.
So you got to change those internal policies to make it better.
So here are some next steps. So we want to ensure that there is internal clarity on where you're going. That's the first step. So leaders have to communicate exactly, what needs to occur given the market, given the internal environment of the organization. You want to be able to develop a list of innovation leaders. So who are they that you have now? What are you missing? So if you're going to be recruiting, who is it? What kind of skills you need to recruit for? And how do you integrate them into your team so that they function well together? Another piece is, identifying where you sit at in terms of your growth or fixed mindset, and what are the kinds of strategies that you might be able to develop short term in order to move people in the direction that you need them to lead to. And that entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial mindset. So you might hire them or you might develop them. And certainly everyone can learn how to develop a feasibility study or a business plan, and learn how to create ideas and all those kinds of things. And so it's something that can be developed over time. Anything else that you'd like to say with regards to what we need to do to promote leadership and for innovation?
I think be encouraging. From a leadership perspective, John mentioned it before, it starts with the leadership, being encouraging, putting the systems in place and showing people that you're rewarding it, you're encouraging it, and that you're not going to punish innovation, right? Because that's what's happened in the past sometimes with some companies.
Right.
Right.
And it's okay as a leader to say, I don't know, I need some help, which some leaders just don't do. But if you have that open mindset, you create the clarity of your vision, you engage your team members and have the right talent in place, focusing on the right problems or opportunities, and that's where the magic happens. And you got to get started. It's not a perfect system. So as leaders, as long as you have that mindset and create that vision and engage your teams in helping you solve those things, then that's really where you need to go.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like if you're not sure where you sit at the moment, you can always engage consultants to help you do an audit. Having done some consulting work myself, I think the consultant has to be there to help you fix something that you're going to take over at some point in time, because otherwise, if you never learn how to do it yourself, you're in trouble long term.
Right, and share it with other business leaders. There are many businesses that are well along their journey as well, so talking to other organizations about what's worked, what's not worked is a really good way to get some stimulus.
Excellent. As well. Yes, use your network.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much. That concludes our session on leadership of innovation.